Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri Love. I'm your host. Thank you for tuning in. Today we are recording episode 141. Before I introduce my guest, I want to introduce my book, which is the same title as this podcast. It's called A Gift from Adversity. The subtitle of this book is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. If you go on Amazon, A Gift from Adversity by Juri, Juri, love, you can find my book. After I published my book in 2020, I received a lot of messages from all over the world, and I felt compelled to start a platform where it's safe and people can share not only their adversities, but the tools that they use to overcome and a gift that came from it. So we are grateful to have so many wonderful guests. Let's invite tonight's guest. Hello, Julia. Thank you so much for tuning in today.
So great to be here. Thank you.
So great. So let's start with your name, where you coming in from today, and what you do, and if you have any social media or website that you want to promote.
So thank you so much. So my name is Julia Pearce, and I am coming in from Salt Lake City, Utah. We are surrounded by mountains that are covered in snow right now. I am ready for the snow to be gone. Other people love it. And right now you can find me on Facebook and Instagram. I also have a website that is juliapearce.net, last name Pearce. And I also have a lot of things going on Instagram. I said that one. And LinkedIn. That's where you can find me.
Perfect. So, Julia, let's dive into the first question of this podcast. So, can you tell our audience what was your adversity?
So it's an intriguing question for me because what is my adversity is also the great joy of my life. Because our story starts with an experience when our son turned 2, right before he turned 2, and ended up in the hospital with what the doctors deemed as a catastrophic illness. And that illness took all of his development when he was a young child at 2 years of age. That meant he could no longer walk or talk or sit up or even eat. He could not do any of those things any longer from a sudden illness that no one knew the cause of. He started having hundreds of seizures, ended up in the emergency room, and then was admitted to the hospital for 9 days in what was an unknown illness at the time. And during this time, the doctors didn't know if he was going to survive, which meant we didn't know. We were young parents at the time. And he went through this adversity with just a 2-year-old tenacity almost. And when the doctors would say, we don't know if he's going to do this, he got up the next day and did it. So he did come home from the hospital after those 9 days, had to relearn everything. They never did find out what happened to him when he was 2 years old. They never found out what that illness was. He was left with illness and disability. He did not regain the ability to speak, although he did learn how to communicate in a variety of ways. And that was the beginning of our experiences with him that a lot of people would call adversity, and he called life.
How old is he now?
So he would be 33. We just celebrated another birthday. He did pass away from his extensive illnesses and disabilities, although he lived every day with just this amazing joy and resilience, which is part of why I have come through this with learning and a continual quest. It's also, if you see on my website as well, that I have written a book about him. And the book was called The Boy Who Became More Than We Could Imagine, because no one could imagine what he overcame and also lived with. So that's what has brought us through all of these years of continual looking forward and being still within our moments is we can imagine what he became and also what we are doing now. But thank you so much for letting me speak about that piece of him as well.
Yeah, of course. How old was he when he passed?
He was almost 22. So when he survived when he was 2, he had 20 years of growing and learning and just teaching us how to become, because he didn't let anything get in his way. Every time somebody said, "We don't think he can," or that he will, he always did one way or another in his own fashion and rhythm. And that's what he did for 20 extraordinary, brilliant, and really hard fought years.
What was the diagnosis that you got?
So we never did get an exact medical diagnosis. When we left the hospital, they called it this big word called post-infectious encephalopathy, which means they think there was an infection somewhere and it had to do with all the things that happen around the brain. Because he lost all of his skills, that was their best way of saying this was a really big illness that happened to him. The additional things that came to him later was he had osteoporosis at one time in his life. He had a muscle wasting disorder that developed at one point in his world. And he also had what was called intractable epilepsy. What that means is they did not find a way to control all of his seizures throughout his life. And they did the best that they could, which means the seizures were there all the time. And he just kept going and doing really amazing and cool things for him, which meant he was an explorer and an adventurer alongside a bunch of really big medical world things as well.
Well, thank you so much for explaining. So, when he was born, you didn't see any sign until 2 years old. It was just normal every day.
He was this really typical young child who suddenly had seizures that started from an unknown, they think, infection that started somewhere. And that's sometimes what happens with young or any age person. A disability can happen at any time. He was not born with a disability.
Wow.
I know. And he was so amazing. He took most things in stride and just said, okay, and now where are we going to go and how are we going to play? And by the way, where's the music so we can dance? Music was an extraordinary part of his life, and probably because it was a part of our life. But he did have a rhythm and a bounce to all of him.
So, Julia, tell me a little bit more about his life before he passed. And I'm very sorry um, for the loss of your son. And my heart goes out to you and your family. Does he have Did he have any siblings, or he was the only child?
He does not have any siblings. We have often said that he was big enough for our world. And he did bring a lot of, like I said, adventure to us. Part of what he did is he lived so big. We often would take Fridays as our play day. We also called it Big Therapy Day. We had wonderful occupational, physical, and speech language pathologists or therapists who would tell us that you just need to go and explore the world. So he would do snow skiing and mountain climbing, and we would go canoeing down rivers, and it was about horseback riding. And playing in the mud and on the trampoline and in every park we could find. Oftentimes, we would take day trips and find a favorite place to eat, do a little window shopping, which for him was finding his favorite item in the world that happened to be a vacuum. Who knew that the best thing in the world was to find a vacuum in every store? And then we would go on the rest of our day trip. So that was part of his world alongside really big medical events. And I think, I love that you have this podcast talking about a gift from adversity, because when we think about the hard parts of life, the way that we know the upside of life is seeing that the hard things happen. And he really did get up every day and say, and now, and when, and let's go. Let's just do this. Even when he was sick for months at a time, he would want to go and do the next thing. He was a really extraordinary teacher and one who wanted to do things with the people around him.
So let me ask you a question. So we are talking about adversity, and then let's say a gift and then tools for the second and third question. So I want to dissect a little bit more. As a mom, your heart absolutely breaks when you
Mm.
see your child being sick. When you initially saw him sick when he was 2 years old, what was your initial reaction or emotion?
I think the initial pieces of it, as I was driving to the hospital, I happened to have um, one of my parents with me, and it was utter disbelief. We go into automatic pilot, and when we arrived at the hospital, everyone there was on automatic pilot as well. So it was disbelief first. And then I started to go into, I should be taking notes. And I did. And I wrote down everything of what doctors were saying and what they were looking like. And I still have those notes. And once in a while, when I'm very brave, I can reflect back and think, man, I didn't know anything. Well, of course, I didn't know anything. I was a young mom, and this was brand new. I had gone from playing at the park and, rubbing out the knees of my jeans because we crawled around so much. And then it was into, I had better learn a couple of things. And before it was learning about what foods do you teach and what foods am I going to prepare, to now I've got to teach language again. And I've got to teach our son how to walk again. And what is occupational therapy? And how am I going to keep all of these doctors? So it was very confusing. And I think what I learned is I had to become a learner. I needed to go back into my learning mode. And that was frightening for a little while because I didn't know how to do that again. And then I found others who said, we'll show you how. We'll show you how to do this. And then I would find some calm. And the next round of illness would come, and I would find others. And that's how it went for those many, many years, alongside, okay, I don't know what to do now. I need to learn. I need to find others. And those were the tools and the skills that came and we built with our young child, who then became a teenager. And oh my gosh, if anyone can give a straight tool about how to get through teenagers and hormones and slamming doors, that all came as well. That wasn't disability, that was a teenager. That's what we did. Found others, lifelong learner, did it again and again.
So did you have any like support group, like Facebook group, or anybody that was going through the similar situation? Did you have any support? And then how did you deal with like relationship with other moms and schools, and how did you manage that through?
So I love that question because in the beginning, it felt like I was a little island floating, not even anchored to the bottom of the sea. And then I received information through one of our state agencies that said, hey, there's a group of parents going to meet. And I clamped onto that, showed up at a meeting. I think there were 4 other parents. I can still remember their names. And we sat there and went, so I don't know anything. Do you know anything? No, I don't know anything, but we're here. And we began to meet every month. I still know those families. It's been 31 years since our son first was in the hospital. So they became friends, cohorts, advocates, mentors, dear, dear friends. And that's how we got through that part of life. Finding other people in the school system became the next level of how do we do this education system, because there are additional laws and spaces for children who have disabilities under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's actually a federal law that supports children in education. So it was a continual, again, learn, find other people, and stay connected with them. It's been and still is a space and place that I can be. Even though our son has passed away, there are places that I can reach out to for those um, individuals and needs.
And was how would you describe to our audience your mental state when you are really struggling, learning, discovering, maybe feeling isolated? Like, do you recall maybe devastation? Um, what do I do? Like, do you remember any of these like feelings?
Oh, wow. As you were saying those things, I had a rush to my heart about all of those things, the isolation, and then the joy at finding one person who knew what I was talking about. And then the massive, there's no one else who's ever gone through this. Again, this sheer desperation at sometimes of how am I going to do the next step? And then, okay, just calm, 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 calm. Those are things that I had to really work with. And I found that that was mine to bring to myself so that I did not bring chaos to our home. Our son was a very intuitive, insightful soul. So he could feel our energy as soon as we came through the door. So if I was bringing angst into the house, he felt the angst and it increased it almost increased his dilemmas. It increased his angst. And so it was really important for me to feel everything and meet with others so I could then find my own calm to bring him calm. And I can still feel the shivers up my spine when I didn't know what to do. And my husband and I would meet with many, many people about how do we prepare for this and how do we do this. And sometimes you can't prepare. You have to stand in a space and feel it all and then go, wow, that was big. And I'm going to keep going. It's really, really intense sometimes. And I still do it. I still do it. And I can now do it with other people if I'm taking care of myself as well. Even now, even now.
And how did this challenge affect your relationship with your husband?
We made a really clear decision when our son was in the hospital, actually, when he was 2 years old. We stood next to his crib and said, "We don't know what's happening. We don't know if he's going to survive this. So, what are we going to do?" And we stood there and said, "But we will. And if we get to bring him home, then we will. And we will keep doing and going and being." And we've said that so many times. We said it, in fact, the week before he passed away. We did not know it was that week, but we said, "Are we going to survive? Are we going to continue? Will we choose to?" And we said, yeah, we will. Because we had a really powerful base, and we adored our son, and we adore him now. And the fibers of us are so tied impactfully together, the three of us. And we decide all the time, we will continue. This is so powerful. We did it consciously, and we do it consciously now.
Well, thank you very much for sharing it. So, the day that he passed, what happened?
So he had been through what they call palliative care. Palliative care comes when a person has extended illnesses. There's a team of people that we were able to meet with at our children's hospital that is here in Utah. I had been able to meet with them for a few years because Dallin at that point had also had a degenerative illness along with his other extended medical needs. And even if you say, "I think I know what's coming," there's no way to know. So we had been meeting with that palliative care team. He had also then been found that he needed hospice care, and hospice is end of life care. We don't speak about it much in some parts of the world. Nobody had talked with us very well about it. They did at that point talk with us about hospice care. He had gotten much weaker because of his extensive, again, medical needs, and his epilepsy had progressed. So he was at the end of life. We were there with him that day, and it was the time that the body takes for that day, and he passed away at home with all of us around him. And it was his day to be released from his life here. It was extensive for us and mostly calm for him, as much as a body can go through that.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. What was your son's name?
His name is Dallin.
Wow. Well, another thing I really want to ask, um, when you are dealing with hospital visits and then learning and then doing all this stuff, what was your job? Were you working? How were you sustaining financially? Like, it must be so hard.
So I was working a few hours in our school district. I worked around what Dallin's needs were. At one point, he had become ill with pneumonia and was sick for 4 months. And at that point, I made a job change within the school district. I worked for an incredible group of people and with them, and needed to make a job change with that. They made it so when he needed continual care that I was able to take the time. It was a really powerful group of people to work with. I ended up working with the team of people that also supported individuals who needed communication supports. It's called augmentative and alternative communication. He used that as a way to communicate as he had lost his spoken language and yet could communicate through many other means, including what's that called that augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC is what it's sometimes called as well. So I worked with the schools for 19 years during that time to have the flexibility to care for him, and be available during that time. It was a powerful and really responsive job that I had for most of those years.
So after your son passed away, how were you feeling? I know it may be like 10 years ago almost.
Mm-hmm.
How was your like mental state? Like, did you feel completely lost, or like did you feel like, okay, this is gonna be my next chapter of life and kind of move forward? What do you remember?
I think it was both of those things. It was, I have no idea who I am any longer. I was Dallin's mom. People see me now who worked with him when he was 2 years old in the hospital, and they say, "Oh my gosh, it's Dallin's mom." And I am blown away the power and the impact he has had on people. So after he died, I did not know who I was. I mentioned that music was a powerful part of our world, and I couldn't listen to music for 3 years. I couldn't leave the house without checking many, many parts of our house. And then slowly, that new grief, that acute grief, becomes something different. And it did for me. And I was completely surprised by it. I thought, I will never do anything different than this. I kept going to work. I started a new job. I met new people. And yet I had no idea who I was any longer. I would stand with my husband and say, "What is this?" It was grief. And then I could listen to music one day again, and it felt almost like I was being played a trick on. And it was suddenly, part of me had come back a little bit, and I didn't know what to do with it. And then it kept going from there. Part of the thing that I have found with my grief is it doesn't get smaller, but somehow I have a grief muscle that has kept me upright. I no longer feel so abrupt in this world without our son, although I miss him like the sunshine doesn't come as brightly anymore. What I did find though is when the music came back, I could think a little more clearly. And I don't know if that will ever make sense to most people. And yet that's what it felt like. And so that's how the book came into play, is the songs came back and the experiences dared to show up again. And I thought, oh, there they are. And perhaps it's Dallin saying, "It's okay. Come on. We were meant for more. Keep becoming. He never stopped. How can I?" And it has been more than 10 years now. And I still am learning and trying to figure this out. And who do we do something for next? That is our daily quest in our home with my husband and myself, to say, so what are we going to do? We didn't stop before, so now what is this? We keep going. Even with all of the yearning and the straining of our hearts being shattered, keep going. That feels absurd, a little offensive at times, that how could we do that without our Dallin here? And yet we can't stop. The sun does come up every once in a while.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. So, Julia, let's move on to the next question, which is the tools that you use to overcome. So, this is one of the favorite part of my podcast, A Gift from Adversity, that so far you're the 141st guest, but everybody who went through different kind of challenges
Yeah.
have so many tangible tools that people can use. I use it myself too. So this is not from internet search. It's not from the therapist. It's something that people actually uh, were able to use and apply, struggled, try and error. So what would you say the best tools that worked for you?
Wow, that's a big one. I do think the best tools for me have been continuing to reach out. And if I have learned something, if something was missing for me, if I couldn't find it, then I need to create it. And that is the thing that is sticking out to me is we learned so much from the day that Dallin was born, the joy that he brought to us, and then from the day that he started to survive. It wasn't one moment that he survived and, oh, there it is, the rainbows. Rainbows came, but it wasn't the quick survival for him. It was, I'm going to get up and we're going to do this. So I think the one thing for me has been to create for the next person because that's what we were given is somebody created for us, so we will do it for the next person now.
Is there any other tools that you are able to apply, especially going through like mental state, um, maybe breathing or like anything that you apply to keep it going when it was really, really, really hard?
So there was one other thing, and our son actually did this with us. So it was when our son was born, I began doing yoga because I did need to find that calm. And oh, lands, children do not bring calm to themselves. So I started doing yoga. Our son began doing yoga when he was in elementary school. So maybe 7 or 8 years old. He would do a couple poses and do the deep yoga breath. They would call it candle. So he would put his hands together and do candle. They taught it to him at school. He had also seen me doing it for years and years. I would call it namaste. He would call it candle. And one point we could say, Dallin, candle. And it would really be part of also, people call it box breathing or four square breathing. And it could just calm his whole nervous system to the point, like I'm doing it now within my own self, that he could find a bit of calm. He also had anxiety attacks and clinical depression that came along with all of the physiological and biological changes that were going through him. That one piece of teaching breathing with yoga for both of us became the space of, I can come into this. We're going to go into this along with every hard moment.
Well, thank you very much. My 70 years old Japanese mom is a yoga teacher.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then she came to America and then she had shoulder problems. And then after yoga, she was able to lift and she's 70 now doing headstand and then started a yoga studio. She looks like really super young and rock singer now. But I think before yoga, she really wasn't healthy and she had some difficulty moving around. So yoga really helped her too.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because yoga wasn't that popular when she came to America in 2007, and especially well, it was kind of getting, but then in Japan it wasn't really like talked about, but
Mm.
I feel like yoga became super popular these days for people to be able to access. And then what I really like about yoga is, when you are doing the pause, they teach you to breathe in and breathe out along with the pause. And then sometimes when we were in the midst of panic and then hyperventilation, people often say, you can't do that when you are in a full-blown panic attack. You have to prepare it before it causes, and then the goal is to reduce the amount of panic attacks. And then, the anxiety part of it is to do these kind of a mental training exercise slash daily as much as possible to be equipped, and so that you can combat these things and then be stronger. And it's very interesting during the interview that you said that kids, children, like whoever, even adult, obviously, if you love somebody and then if you live with them, it's so contagious. And then it can be love, it can be anger, it can be anxiety, and it just spreads around like virus. And then
Yeah.
it could be love someday, but it could be like horrible anxiety, and then everyone's like depressed. And then it's so interesting that also you said about learning part of it earlier, that you learn, and you don't know what to do, and you reach out, and then you kind of grow from it. And then, you know, one of the tools that maybe you can share with our audience is like when you learn, there's some people who just learn information as is, but then there are people who can apply the learning and the wisdom in the daily life, or act, actively apply. So, like, do you have any tools that you may have used? Say, okay, I learned this, I apply, but I learned this, but this didn't work.
So when I first got into one of the deepest parts of learning, our son was very young. I had no idea. Again, I just stepped into things and I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to be here to learn with this group of people. And one of the greatest mentors that I have in my realm, in my space, as I was going through a training, said, "You're going to hear a lot of things. This is what you need to remember. Take what is important for you right now and you figure out how to put it into your life. And then take what is important for you next and put that into your life." There's no way we can take everything and smash it into practice all at once. It's taking one thing and putting it into place, and taking the next thing and putting it in. And I think what has happened now, because I got started in this world 31 years ago. We barely had computers in our home at that point. There were no phones. There was barely a pager that I had access to at that time. In fact, I think pagers were just for doctors. And we got lucky years later, a few years later. And so now when people are just, you can Google this and ask now about artificial intelligence, and they'll give you whatever you think is correct. It's that same piece. Take what you think is important and do one thing. There's no way we can put all of this or that or what the next person into your life. And what is important, like what starts to trickle your spine, what comes up on your arms and makes you go, "Oh, what was that?" That one piece of advice led me into more safe spaces with our son. And since he has died, to know I need to pause here. And perhaps it's with my breath, and perhaps it's with the person sitting next to me, and perhaps it's when I need to look deeply into somebody's eyes and say, "I wonder if there's more." that I can learn or be still with this person. That was the beginning for me.
Well, thank you very much. It's so important to have this conversation because sometimes when people see somebody who's hurt or struggling, you oh, go see a therapist, do this, it actually panics you more
Yeah.
because you're in the middle of this storm. One thing that you don't understand is when you are in the middle of the storm, taking one breath is enough,
Mm.
and it's so hard. And moving forward just one step is just so hard. And when people overwhelms you with ton of information, like you said, internet as well, but then like, okay, do this, you're doing wrong, you're doing this and doing that. And I'm like, wait a minute, I can't think that much. I don't have mental capacity right now. And I really like what you said about what your mentor said about take what you can and apply it. And then take another thing when you can. And I think most of the people who don't understand these challenges are like trying to be helpful in a way, but they need to be a little bit more sensitive, not crossing the boundary, because I feel there's not so many conversation because they just like say, oh, go see a therapist. You have a therapist. Do you have a therapist? It's not like that at
Yeah.
all. So I really appreciate you sharing these tools of basically you don't have to take everything what people advise you, but what works for you.
It's also very tricky to find your own space, and that takes a moment. It's okay to take that moment and let it come with you. I didn't know who that was. I didn't know who I was for those first years after our son's illness. I did know who I was before that, and I needed to remember I do know who I am. I do know I have feet. Find it again. It's going to be here. And then I did. It did take some time. I did need to find people who said, you are okay. You don't have to know everything. And it was okay. I had to do the same thing after he died, and it took me a few years. I still am seeking, I still am learning, and it's going to be what it is now. Okay is different almost every day, and it's okay.
Thank you. It's completely different. When I had a nonprofit for 12 years as a president and founder, and when I closed a nonprofit, I had this weird identity crisis because like you said, you're Darren's mom, but like, I was the president of Genuine Voices, which is a nonprofit for like 12 years. And I just like had like a weird, like kind of like a ghosting feeling. And then people even said to me, you look soulless or you look like a ghost or something. And I just didn't know like what to do next. And then because you invested so much of your time into one thing for many, many years, and then you just like I just like closed and lost. And I'm like, what's next? Like, what is my identity? And then sometimes these identity crisis could be some devastating moment in your life because you are go, 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 and then you're doing this, and then people know you that way, but then you lose it. And then you're just like, oh my gosh, what do I do next?
Yeah. I think it's okay to ask all the questions and to sometimes wrestle with so and now and then and be still with it. I think it's also okay to rumble and dream big and go with whoever is with you at the time, and it's okay to go in all of the directions and sometimes say, well, that didn't go, or all right, let's twist it now and go wherever it leads. Go deep and And my husband says, man, there's a lot of ands with you. And I said, yeah, yes, I am. I am in my third act. I've told people I'm in my third act. There was the first part before our son, the second part with our son, and this third part, I have no idea. I'm going to keep going. Let's see what happens. Let's see. Sure.
So, Julia, thank you very much for this rich conversation, and I honor your son, and I'm so sure that he will be listening and then being very proud that you're sharing this story. Because at the end of the day, there are parents right now who might be struggling with same issues, and there are parents out there might be feeling lonely or isolated. But because of you shared your story with your son, that I think some of the audience that we don't know who's going to be listening to may get some ideas or something that they can take away from our conversations. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I do think it's important to remember that we can become resilient with joy. I do think that we can do more than we have thought imaginable, and we're here to do it together. Hard stuff is meant to be spoken about, and I thank you so much. What a lovely time. I appreciate you.
Thank you. And my last question before you go is a gift that came from it. So, Julia, can you share with our audience what would you say the gift that came from your adversity?
This one has helped me really think deeply about the gift. And I think the gift is remembering that I do have a space here. I am still Dallin's mom. I do remember that when people are so open to sharing what he taught them. His experience was so massive and universal. It was more than his disability, it was more than his illness, it was his essence. And I think with that, the gift that adversity brought to me was remembering that each of us have that. Dallin did it, and so can we. He did it every day alongside perplexing things that he did not have an understanding about. He went into experiences, and sometimes he'd look at us and go, and start signing about what is this and why are we here and when are we finished? And then we would be finished, and he would be super happy to get his favorite chips and go home and watch a hilarious movie. And I think the gift is the joy that comes alongside of deep, hard, perplexing things is what can come alongside of it all. And that is what I keep learning when I'm going, man, I've been knocked around. And the word is trying to go somewhere and help somebody next. And there's a lot of stuff that keeps happening. And we're going to keep doing it. And I'm going to keep doing it because I have something else to do. And perhaps it's this thing today for this person. And perhaps that is what the gift that has come. It has always been our son. He will always be here to teach one more person. But that one more person may be me. He may still be saying, come on, mom, you're not done. Come on. And it may be the next time his friends see me and say, oh my gosh, it's Dallin's mom. I am so happy to see you. Perhaps that's the gift as well.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. So, if somebody is going through the same adversity today, what is your biggest advice for them?
Please reach out. Please find somebody who can help you learn what it is that you don't even know there is a space to learn. If you are going through new happenings like we did when we were in the hospital standing next to a crib going, I have no idea if we're going to survive this, if our son is going to survive, please reach out. If you are in new grief, please reach out to somebody. It could be, I love to speak with new families who are in any of those stages. That would be the thing to do. Isolation is where we find our biggest obstacles. We think we're alone, because I sure did think it many times over more than 30 years. That is where we find our biggest spaces of defeat. I have felt it, and we don't need to do it any longer.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your genuine advice and conversation and authenticity. And I thank Darren for sharing his story along with you, and that we are learning many voices, and then your advocacy is beautiful. And I really appreciate you again for coming to A Gift from Adversity.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you to our audience that's been growing. And I'm very pleased that we have almost 600 followers on Spotify for this channel, and people listening, tuning in from all over the world. And I am available on Facebook, Instagram at Juri Panda, Facebook JURILOVE. If you want to be a part of this podcast, please send me a message, and we'll have more guests coming in. So stay tuned.